Yes, you can introduce.
Bismillahirrahman.
Yeah, yeah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone. This is Afia Haq. I welcome you all in this scheduled meeting of BCPS preparatory classes. Our today's topic is anticoagulation and it will be presented to you by Dr. Safar Iqbal. I want to give you the brief introduction of our respected speaker. He has passed firmly from GCF Pioneer Batch 2010 and got third position, selected as junior scientist in Punjab Forensic Science Agency in 2011. Joined Primary and Secondary Healthcare Department Punjab as Hospital Pharmacist, Drug Inspector through Public Service Commission Batch 2011, MPhil in Pharmacology in 2013, joined Armed Forces Hospital KSA in 2015 as inpatient pharmacist. He has done his BCPS in 2019, currently working as a clinical pharmacist at Armed Forces Hospital KSA. It was some highlights from his bright career so far. Now I would like Dr. Safar to further proceed his lecture and will start his presentation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Ms. Afia. So, Assalamu alaikum to everyone. And today's talk is about the anticoagulation. I don't have any conflict of interest. Anticoagulation chapter, actually, it's a little bit different from the other BCPS chapter because there is a lack of continuity in that chapter. So we can divide this chapter into 5 different portions. And this chapter is actually included in 2019 in BCPS course. And now this chapter is a part of BCPS and as well as a cardiology certification course. So these are the different portions which we will discuss in this chapter, inshallah. So first one is the stroke prevention in non-valvular fibrillation, atrial fibrillation. Actually, atrial fibrillation, what is atrial fibrillation? Atrial fibrillation is a supraventricular tachycardia in which the irregular or fast cardiac rhythm. I will not go in detail about the etiology and different risk factors because this one you already discussed in cardiology chapter. I will just give you the brief pathophysiology of this atrial fibrillation. Actually, during the atrial fibrillation, the AV nodes is not sending a proper impulse. The impulse are erratic in nature, and that's why the atria is not fully contracted. When the atria is not fully contracted, it will not be emptied completely. When it's not emptied completely, then there is a pooling of blood occur in the atria. And because of this pooling and blood stasis, the mural thrombus are formed inside the atria. Mural thrombus, actually the thrombus which is formed within the vascular lining or within the cardiac chamber, it's called mural thrombi or mural thrombus. And because of this thrombus then further lead to the atrial embolization or stroke. So this is the brief pathophysiology of stroke in non-valvular atrial fibrillation. Next, we will see the risk stratification of ischemic stroke in non-valvular atrial fibrillation patient. I think so you already see this CHAD score in the cardiology section when you discuss the stroke there. The CHAD score, it's C stand for congestive heart failure, H for hypertension, age for more than or equal to 75, diabetes mellitus, and previous stroke or transient ischemic attack. But there is a comprehensive form of CHAD score that is a CHAD-VAS score. There are some additional factors included in that. That is a vascular diseases and also age. If age is less than 75, so 65 to 75, and sex category is included. If the female patient, then we give one extra point for this CHAD score.
Yes. अस्सलाम वालेकुम. डॉक्टर साहब को चाहिए जो है.
Next is the next we will see that on the basis of this CHAD score, we will categorize our risk factor of stroke in this patient. It's either low, intermediate, or high. If the CHAD score is more than 2, then the risk of stroke is high in this population. Next is the American Heart Association guidelines about the treatment of this non-valvular atrial fibrillation prophylaxis for stroke. If the CHAD score, if you will see that in man is 0 and woman in 1, then it's reasonable to omit the any anti-thrombotic therapy, or we can consider the aspirin only in that patient. But if the CHAD score is in 1 in men and 2 in women because of the sex category, then we can consider the anti-thrombotic therapy in that patient, or we can start even the anticoagulation with direct oral anticoagulant. But if the CHAD score is 2 in men and 3 in women, which is a high risk category, we definitely start the anticoagulation therapy in that patient. And in that patient, the direct oral anticoagulation is better than the warfarin. Next is the different recommendation of the ACP for the atrial fibrillated patients. That first recommendation is that when this patient, we have to categorize or stratify the risk factor of stroke in that patient, and for the risk stratification, we will choose the CHAD scores, CHAD-VAS scores. Next is the anti-thrombotic therapy of the, if the patient has the CHAD-VAS score more than 1 in male and more than 2 in female, we should have to start the anti-thrombotic therapy. Third thing is the bleeding risk assessment. As these population, the atrial fibrillated patient, this is very important that we have to maintain a balance between the stroke prophylaxis and the bleeding risk. So we have to make a balance between. So we have to consider the bleeding risk in that patient because we are using the anticoagulant in that patients. Next is the Hasblad score. Hasblad score is particularly used for the patient which are using the warfarin as an anticoagulant. If the Hasblad score is more than or equal to 3, the bleeding risk is very high in that patient. Next is the antiplatelet therapy recommendation. We are using the anti-platelet therapy like aspirin or clopidogrel for stroke, but it's not a highly recommended therapy. Only in particular situation we will prefer these medications. Next is the, if we are using the anticoagulant, we prefer the direct oral anticoagulant over the vitamin K antagonist. Next is the therapeutic time in therapeutic range. The time in therapeutic range is very important if we are using the any anticoagulant therapy. So it should be at least 65%. That it means like when we are using any anticoagulant, particularly warfarin, the vitamin K antagonist. So during the whole duration of therapy, the 65%, at least 65%, the INR value is within the range. It should be within the range. So this is the time in therapeutic range. If it's not within the, it is less than 65%, we will make some intervention or we have to change the therapy from vitamin K antagonist to the direct oral anticoagulants. Next is the, if the patient is atrial fibrillated and more than 48 hours has been passed or unknown duration, and the patient is going for elective cardioversion. I am not going in detail for elective cardioversion because this one is already discussed in the cardiology section in detail, I think so. So if the patient is going for elective cardioversion, so we should have to start the anticoagulation at least 3 weeks before the elective cardioversion. Either we will use the vitamin K antagonist with an INR range of 2 or 3, or the other one, we will use the direct oral anticoagulants. Similarly, in these similar patients, after the cardioversion, we should have to give the patient with vitamin K antagonist or direct oral anticoagulant for at least 4 weeks. Next is the patient with the atrial fibrillation who have an acute ischemic stroke. We should continue the anticoagulation until the patient has the contraindication like the bleeding risk is high, so we should have to stop that one. Otherwise, we will continue them. These are some recommendations about the atrial fibrillated patient from the ACCP. Next is the, we will go for the therapy for the prophylaxis of stroke in that population. First of all, we will use the warfarin. Warfarin is, as you know, that it's vitamin K antagonist. There are 2 different isomers of the warfarin. It's S isomers and R isomers. which is 5 times more potent than S isomer. Different clotting factor involved are factor 2, factor 7, factor 9, and 10. In various trials, warfarin shows 70 to 80% risk reduction in stroke and systemic embolism. In that patient, in that population, in non-valvular atrial fibrillated population, we will keep the INR goal between 2 and 3. Therapy, when we start with the therapy with the warfarin, so initial dose should be 5 milligram, but in hospitalized patient, because it's under observation, direct observation of the healthcare professionals, so we can start with the 10 milligram, or we can decrease the dose for 2 to 3 milligram if the patient has different risk factors like advanced age, low body weight, infections, malnourishment, heart failure, hyperthyroid state, low albumin, liver diseases, etc. Half-life of the different clotting factor like factor 7 is 6 hours, 9 is 24 hours, 10 is 36 hours, and 2 is 72 hours. Next is the INR monitoring in that patients. One thing is very important that when we are measure the INR for any patient, if we measure the INR value for today, it will give us the value of the dose which we took 3 or 4, 5 days ago. So if we are checking the INR of today, it will reflect the dose 3 to 4 hours before that patient took. And so we have to consider these things. This thing is very important. And the other one is the usually 5 to 7 days it will take the warfarin to reach a maximum dose, the maximum effect of the dose. Next is if we have to increase or decrease, because if our value is out of the INR and we have to increase or decrease the dose, so we cannot increase like a particularly daily dose like that, which we cannot increase or decrease like this. We will decrease the weekly cumulative dose, 5 to 20% window. Either we will increase 5% of the weekly dose, or either we will decrease the 5% of the weekly dose. So 5 to 20% is the window that we can increase or decrease the weekly dose, not the daily dose. So this is also an important factor here. Next, if the INR value is greater than 4.5, so we can hold 1 or 2 doses and then reinitiate or restart the therapy with the lower dose. Then if the INR value is single value is out of range, for example, 0.5 or less, then we will continue the same dose, but we will measure the INR after 1 or 2 weeks. If the only value difference is 0.1 above and below the INR window, then we will not adjust the dose, we will continue the same dose. Next is, if the INR value is decreased like 1.8 or less, the risk of ischemic stroke is increased to 60%. But if the INR value is increased up more than 4%, only little bit changes, little bit effect on the bleeding risk. So this is very important that we have to keep the INR value within the range or upper limit of the range, that the patient should be within 2 or 3. It should not be go less than 2, like 1.8 or less than 1.8, because if it will go less than 1.8 or below that value, so the risk of ischemic stroke is very high, 60% or more. Next, time in therapeutic range, we already discussed that it should be between 65 to 70% during the whole therapy duration. Haspelat score, as I told you that this Haspelat score is particularly used for the warfarin patient, that patient who are using the warfarin, we have to check the bleeding risk. So different factors in that Haspelat score are hypertension, abnormal renal and liver function, history of stroke, history of bleeding, labile INRs, age, drug, and alcohol excess. So this is the different factors. If the Haspelat score is equal or more than 3, the bleeding risk is high, we have to make some adjustment in the treatment to decrease the bleeding risk in that population. Next is the different, because as we know that the warfarin has many interaction with different drugs, different diseases. So we have to consider when using the warfarin as an anticoagulant option. warfarin, the various drugs which decrease the INR, like closteramines, sulfate, which decrease the absorption of the warfarin, enzyme induction, which increase the metabolism of the warfarin. That's why INR is decreased. And on the other side, if you will see that S and R warfarin, they are the two different isomers. They are metabolized by two different isoenzymes. So this is also important, that which drugs which blocking which enzyme, and when that's why the INR value is increased. On the other hand, if you will see that the warfarin clearance is affected by different drugs, amiodarone, propafenone, cimetidine, when we are using. Similarly, the vitamin K synthesis is decreased with the antibiotics. If we will see that drug disease interaction, then the increased clotting factor consumption in the hyperthyroid state and favor reduced warfarin metabolism with heart failure and liver diseases, reduced clotting factor production with the liver diseases. And the other hand, when we will see the food, the daily requirement of the vitamin K is 80 microgram per day. And we have to make sure that the patient should take the 80 microgram per day, so that our warfarin effect should be consistent. Otherwise, it will be erratic, because vitamin K deficiency or excess make the effect erratic. So these are the different interactions. Next is the direct oral anticoagulant. These are the particularly important drugs in this population and non-valvular atrial fibrillation patients. And we have different 4 drugs, that dabigatran, apixaban, rivaroxaban, and doxaban, that are used in this population, and different pharmacokinetics properties of these drugs as showing in this chart. If you will see the bioavailability, the rivaroxaban we should have to take with food. It will increase the bioavailability of the drug. Half-life is different. Renal clearance, if you will see, the dabigatran is 80% excreted through renal excretion. Protein binding is high with rivaroxaban. Similarly, dialysis, only the dabigatran is removed from the dialysis, but the other, they don't have any effect. Hepatic metabolism is particularly high with rivaroxaban and apixaban. Next is the dosing consideration of these drugs in the non-valvular atrial fibrillation patients. Dabigatran standard dose is 150 milligram twice daily, but we have to adjust the dose if the creatinine clearance is between 50 to 30 ml or 30 to 50 ml, but the patient is using different enzyme inhibitors like ketoconazole, dronedarone. The dose should be reduced to half, 75 mg twice daily, and we will avoid, if the creatinine clearance is below than 50 ml, dialysis, and 15 to 30 ml, but if the patient is using some inhibitors, or if the patient is using the inducer like rifampin, so we will not use this drug. Similarly, the rivaroxaban standard dose is 20 milligram once daily with meal, and if the dose should be decreased to 15 milligram if the creatinine clearance is 15 to 50 ml and dialysis. And we will avoid if the patient is using the strong inhibitor or inducer drugs. Apixaban standard dose is 5 milligram twice daily. We will decrease the dose. In the apixaban especially, there are 3 different factors we will see. If either of the 2 factors are present in the patient, we will decrease the dose. First one is the patient age is more than or equal to 80 years. Patient weight is less than or equal to 60 kg. And creatinine clearance is more than or equal to 1.5 milligram per deciliter. If either 2 factors are present in the patient, we should have to decrease the dose to half, 2.5 milligram twice daily. Otherwise, if the patient is having a strong inhibitor, then we will decrease the dose. On the other side, when we will avoid when the patient has strong inducers, or patient is already on a decreased dose and the patient is using the strong inhibitors. Doxaban 60 milligram once daily, 30 milligram once daily when we use the creatinine value is 15 to 50 ml. P-glycoprotein inhibitor is using, and the patient weight is less than or equal to 60 kg. On the other side, why we will avoid when the critical clearance is very high? Because it's 80% excretion through the renal. So when the creatinine clearance is very high, so it is also excreted from the through the urine. So 95% is more than 95%. So we will avoid. If less than 15%, we will avoid dialysis. And if the patient is using the rifampin inducer drugs, so we will avoid this one. Next are the different trials which are used for these drugs. In each trial, these drugs are compared with the warfarin as a standard control drug, but there are different controversies between these trials. First one is that all the drugs shows the better efficacy as compared to the warfarin, but only dabigatran is the one who shows statistical significance in reducing the ischemic stroke. Its first reason is that it's an unblinded trial. The other three trials are the double-blinded trials, but this one, the dabigatran relay trial, is only the unblinded study. So from different studies, it's already shown that when we are using the unblinded trial, our focus is more on the interventional group. So that's why the results for the interventional group is better than the other groups. So that's why maybe this is one of the reasons that dabigatran is showing statistical significance, while the other trials, they are not showing the statistical significance, but they are better than the warfarin in these trials. Next is the all agent reduced mortality about 10%. Only apixaban is achieving statistical significance. All they are reducing the mortality, but apixaban is showing a statistical because the apixaban contain better population, more population, 18,000, 2,000 extra in each groups. 2,000 patient extra in each group that is present. If you will see that you can say that the engaged trial for adoxaban, it's containing 21,000, but apixaban is containing only 18,000. How the apixaban population is high? You will see that adoxaban 21,000 population, but it's a 3-arm trial. It's not a 2-arm trial. It's 3 arms, mean that we have 3 different groups. Same in relay trial, dabigatran is a 3-arm trial. We have 3 different groups because we compared warfarin. Warfarin is a control group in these 2 trials, and the other 2 groups are the 2 different dosage form we use. For example, in dabigatran, one group use the dose 150 milligram BID, and this other group use 110 milligram BID. So we compare 3 groups. Similarly, in adoxaban, we compare, it's a triple arm trial. It's one is the warfarin, the other one is the adoxaban 60 milligram dose daily, and the third one is the adoxaban 30 milligram dose. So that's why but in apixaban, you will see that 18,000 patients, and there are 2 arm trial. One is a warfarin, and the other one is the standard dose of the apixaban. If you will go in detail of these trials, we cannot compare these drugs on the basis of these trials because the population difference is there. If you will see that the relay trial, I already told you that it's a non-blinded study, while the other trial, it's a double-blinded trial. If you will see, the most important thing is the population. If you will see the CHAD score, and especially in the ROCKET trial, it's 87% population of these trials, it's having a CHAD score of 3 to 6%. That means this trial contains most critical patients. The 87% population have a high CHAD score, that their risk of stroke is very high in these patients. And so we cannot compare the other with the 32% and 30%, or even you will see that in ENGAGE only 23% have the score between 4 to 6. So that's why this population variability is there. And the previous stroke, you will see that the 55% ROCKET trial have the patient having the previous stroke or transient ischemic attack, but the other trial, the value is low. Similarly, the protocol to manage INR, we have the protocol to manage INR in each trial, but in ROCKET trial, it's not there. So it's a real-time scenario, real-life scenario that they are managing according to their condition. And median time in therapeutic range, it's less in rocket trial because the population severity is very high. So it's very difficult in that critical patient to maintain the time in therapeutic range in that population. So these are some different differences in this trial. On the basis of these differences, we cannot compare that one drug is better than the other drug, and one drug is showing better result to the other drugs. Okay, next is the different conversion strategies. These strategies you already discussed in the cardiology chapters. I will just give you a brief first of all, the how to convert or equal to 50 ml. We will start warfarin 3 days before. If between 31 to 50, we will start 2 days before. If between 50 to 30, we will start 1 day before. If less than 15, we will not start. Dabigatran 0 to 2 are before the next dose of the parenteral drug, like low molecular weight heparin, or if we are using the continuous infusion like unfractionated heparin, who will discontinue the infusion and start the dabigatran. For patient who has the creatinine value is more than 30 ml and currently taking dabigatran, we have to wait for the 12-hour, or with the patient with have the creatinine clearance is less than 30 ml, we have to wait for 24 hours to start the parenteral drug when we are converting from dabigatran to other anticoagulants. Next is the converting from warfarin to dabigatran. Discontinue warfarin and start the dabigatran when the INR value is less than 2. Next is the rivaroxaban conversion. Converting from rivaroxaban to warfarin, discontinue rivaroxaban and begin both the parenteral and anticoagulant or warfarin when the next dose of the rivaroxaban should be taken. Discontinue the parenteral and anticoagulant when the INR reach an acceptable range. Converting from rivaroxaban to anticoagulant other than warfarin, discontinue the rivaroxaban and give the first dose of the other anticoagulant, oral, parenteral, or other than warfarin next when the next warfarin dose should be taken. Converting from warfarin to rivaroxaban, we will discontinue warfarin and initiate rivaroxaban. The INR volume is less than 3. Similarly, the converting from anticoagulant other than warfarin to rivaroxaban, begin rivaroxaban 0 to 2 hours for the next scheduled dose of the parenteral drugs, for example, like low molecular weight heparin, non-warfarin oral equivalents, etc. Or if the patient is using the unfractionated heparin infusion, we will discontinue the infusion and start at the same time the rivaroxaban. Next is abixamine conversion strategies, similar like the discontinue converting from abixaban to warfarin. We will discontinue abixaban and start the parenteral anticoagulant or warfarin when the next dose of the abixaban is due. Next is the converting from abixaban to anticoagulant other than warfarin. Discontinue abixaban and begin the new anticoagulant at the usual time of the next dose. Same. Converting from warfarin to abixaban, discontinue warfarin and wait for the INR to it will come less than 2, we will start abixaban. Converting from anticoagulant other than warfarin to abixaban, begin abixaban same 0 to 2 hours before the next scheduled administration of drug, and do not administer the other anticoagulant. For unfractionated heparin, we will do continuous infusion. We will stop the infusion and start the abixaban. Adoxaban conversion from adoxaban to warfarin, there are two different strategies. One is the oral option. First one is that if the patient is already taking the 60 milligram of the adenosine, we will reduce the dose to half, 30 milligram, and begin concomitantly with warfarin and continue. And if the patient is already taking the 30 milligram, we will to 15 milligram and start the warfarin concomitantly. Then we will observe the ionodoxaban in control with the warfarin. Parental option, discontinue doxaban and administer parental anticoagulant at the time of the next doxaban dose once a stable INR is more than or equal to 2 is achieved. The parental anticoagulant should be discontinued and warfarin continued. So this is either we will by combining the parental with warfarin together. Both together we will start when the INR value is achieved more than or equal to 2, then we will discontinue the parental and continue with the warfarin. This is the second strategy. Next is the converting from adoxaban to anticoagulant other than warfarin. Discontinue adoxaban and begin the new anticoagulant at the usual standard time of the adoxaban dose. Converting from warfarin to adoxaban, similarly, we will stop, discontinue warfarin and wait for the INR less than or equal to 2.5, and then we will start the adoxaban. From other anticoagulation to adoxaban, discontinue the other anticoagulant and begin the adoxaban at the usual time of the next dose. Or if the patient is using unfractionated heparin, stop the infusion, and here we will wait for the 4 hours and then we will start the adoxaban. In the different previous drugs, we will start the drugs at the same time when we will discontinue the infusion. So these are the different strategies, conversion strategies. Next is the antiplatelet therapy. As we know that we will discuss something about this antiplatelet therapy. It is recommended in some population, but the preferred therapy is the anticoagulation. So aspirin has the history that it decreases the risk of stroke, but the studies for the aspirin are very limited. SPAF1 trial, it's showing some risk reduction of the ischemic stroke in some patients with non-valvular atrial fibrillation, especially the dose in that patient, they used 325 mg daily. And the patient population is 75 years or younger. Next is Averroes trial. Averroes trial is comparing the abixaban 5 mg twice daily with the aspirin, but they stopped the trial early because the abixaban showing better efficacy than the aspirin. So it shows that the abixaban is better than the aspirin. Next is the active W trial that is compared with warfarin. In the group 1, they use aspirin plus clopidogrel, and in group 2, they use warfarin. So warfarin in that patient, warfarin is showing better result than the aspirin and clopidogrel. If you see the secondary endpoint, no difference in the major bleeding in both the groups. In active A, that is compared with aspirin. This is aspirin plus clopidogrel dual drugs they compared with aspirin. So in that groups, the dual drug, aspirin plus clopidogrel, is showing better results than the aspirin. But the significant increase in major and minor bleeding with the dual drugs. So this is up to the non-valvular atrial fibrillation. Now, within this population, when the patient needs the percutaneous coronary intervention, they need, in these patients, usually we use the triple drug therapy. Triple drug that we are using the aspirin, antiplatelet, we are using P2Y12 inhibitor like clopidogrel, prasugrel, or ticagrelor, and the other third one is the anticoagulant. Either we are using warfarin, or we are using direct oral anticoagulation, or we are using the parenteral loan. So triple therapy is used. And if we are using the warfarin in that patient, the INR value 3. Aspirin, usually we are using in not higher doses, it's 80 milligrams. Clopidogrel is better than the other P2Y12 inhibitor like ticagrelor, prasugrel. These are general recommendation in this population. So now we will see that, and also the Bare metal stent is better than the drug-eluting stent in that population. WOS trial compare the triple therapy that is including warfarin, clopidogrel, and aspirin with the double therapy that is containing warfarin and clopidogrel. We are not included, they didn't include the in that population. If you will see that the endpoint bleeding is significantly reduced by 64% in double therapy. Major bleeding was reduced 44%, significant 40% relative risk reduction in major cardiac event with the double therapy than the triple therapy. But the risk of MI, stent, thrombosis, stroke, and target vessel revascularization is the same. So this trial showing that the dual therapy is better, is more safer than the triple therapy. Next is the Pioneer AF-PC1 trial. In this trial, we use different three population. One group 1 containing rivaroxaban 15 mg plus clopidogrel 75 mg for 12 months. Second group contained rivaroxaban 15 mg plus clopidogrel and plus aspirin, and they divided further into 1, 6, and 12 months. After 1 and 6 months, they changed rivaroxaban 15 mg plus aspirin to complete 12 months. So they stopped the clopidogrel here. After some patients they stop after 1 year, 1 month, some they stop after 6 months, and some patients continue with 3 drugs. In the clopidogrel and aspirin is used similarly for 1, 6, and 12 month strategy. After 1 and 6 months, continue to warfarin and aspirin. Similarly, they stop clopidogrel, some population after 1 month, some population after 6 months, and the remaining they continue 3 drugs up till 12 months. Some modification here is like rivaroxaban, they decrease to 10 milligram once daily when the creatinine clearance value is between 30 to 50 ml per minute. And clopidogrel is the preferred drug, but 2% receive prasugrel and 5% receive ticagrelor in that population. So they show that the primary outcome of clinically significant bleeding was lower in group 1, where we use the rivaroxaban and clopidogrel, than the group 2, where we also use the rivaroxaban, clopidogrel, and aspirin in different steps, different population, then better than the warfarin groups. Although not powered, but evaluate that ischemic stroke is also, ischemic was no difference in the, there is no difference in the composite of the cardiac death, MI, stroke in group 1, 2, and 3. So these factors remain same, but the bleeding significance is, is significantly reduced in the group 1. So this means that group 1 rivaroxaban plus clopidogrel is better than the triple therapy. Next is the ReDual PC1 trial. It's a similar trial to the Pioneer trial. In this one, group 1, dabigatran 110 milligram twice daily plus clopidogrel for 12 months. Second group, 150 mg twice daily plus clopidogrel for 12 months. And third one, they use the standard therapy, which can include warfarin, aspirin, and clopidogrel or ticagrelor. Aspirin was continued after 1 month in patients with metal stent, and after 3 months, which the patient which are using the drug-eluting stent. So primary endpoint for this trial is the clinically relevant non-major bleeding. That one is significantly lower in group 1 than group 3, and group 2 than group 3. So both group 1 is better than group 3 warfarin group, and even this group 2 is better than warfarin group. Also, the other ischemic outcomes is MI, stroke, ischemic embolism, and unplanned revascularization was non-inferior in group 1 and 3 as well as group 2 and 3. So it's almost same. So up till now, the current summary of this thing, if the patient needs percutaneous interventions, the preferred drug is rivaroxaban 50 mg plus clopidogrel, or dabigatran 150 mg twice daily plus clopidogrel in these populations. So this is the first of, we will see some question related to these discussion up till now. I will just summarize all the things what we'll discuss up till now. We'll discuss about the non-valvular atrial fibrillation patient, the risk of stroke in that patient, and then we will see the CHAD score stratification of the risk in that population. Then we will see that the anticoagulation therapy, in which we will discuss the warfarin therapy and the direct oral anticoagulant therapy. Then we see that the direct oral anticoagulant therapy in different trials. Then we see that the patient with the who needs the percutaneous intervention, and for that patients we discussed that the rivaroxaban plus clopidogrel and dabigatran plus clopidogrel have shown the better safety profile. It's the risk of stroke is similar, but the safety profile is high in these drugs. So this is what we discussed up till now. So we will go for the first question. BD is a 73-year-old man, height is 69 inches, weight is 80 kg with newly diagnosed non-valvular atrial fibrillation. He also has a history of hypertension, dyslipidemia, stable ischemic heart disease, systolic heart disease, heart failure. His current medication include aspirin 81 milligram daily, enalapril 10 milligrams daily, atorvastatin 10 milligram daily, metoprolol 100 milligrams, furosemide 40 milligram daily, spironolactone 25 milligram daily, and amlodipine 10 milligram daily. His current heart rate is 72 beats per minute, and blood pressure is 122 by 72 milligram and millimeter of Hg. His laboratory values include potassium, stable creatinine clearance, and blood glucose level. So we have to check the CHAD-VAS score of this patient. As we know that this patient is a C stand for congestive heart failure. As we know that this patient has a systolic heart failure, so we will 1 point for this congestive heart failure. H stand for hypertension. This patient is hypertensive. So second point. A stand for the age more than or equal to 75, but this patient has age less than 75, so this is 0 point. D is for diabetes. This patient is non-diabetic, so no point. S stand for stroke. This patient don't have any history of stroke, so 0 point. V stand for vascular diseases. In these vascular diseases, either patient has the MI or patient has the peripheral artery disease. This patient don't have any peripheral artery disease or MI history, so no score. A stand for the age between 64 to 70, 65 to 74 years. This patient is coming in this range, so 1 point for this one. And S stand for sex. If the patient has female sex, so we will give 1 extra point, but this patient is a male, so we will not give this point. So it means that this patient has the CHAD-VAS score of 3. So answer B is correct for that patient. Next is the which statement is most accurate regarding direct oral anticoagulation therapy for reducing the risk of stroke in patient with non-valvular atrial fibrillation. First, all of the direct oral anticoagulants significantly reduce ischemic stroke in the phase 3 trial compared with warfarin. So as we know that we discussed in the trial controversies that all the drugs shows better efficacy than warfarin, but only the dabigatran is showing statistical significance. So this statement is not correct because they are saying that all the drugs, it's not all the drugs, only the dabigatran. So first one is wrong. Second is all of the direct oral anticoagulant significantly reduce hemorrhagic risk in the phase 3 trial compared with warfarin. Yes, all the drugs showing better safety profile with warfarin, so B is the correct. We will also see C and D. Apixaban is more effective than rivaroxaban because apixaban is a superiority trial and rivaroxaban is non-inferiority trial. We already discussed that we cannot compare these drugs on the basis of those trials because the population difference is there, There are different other factors, unblinded and double-blinded studies. So we cannot compare these two drugs. So this statement is, on the basis of that, the statement is not correct. Dabigatran was studied in the highest risk patient. No, we already know that the highest risk patient is more critical patient are in the rocket trial, that is for the rivaroxaban. So it's not for the dabigatran. So this one is also wrong. So it means that the option 2B is correct, which is the most appropriate regime for the reducing BD risk of stroke. All four drugs are used for the reducing the stroke. But if we will see the different values, because they in the question they give the creatinine clearance values, also patient height, weight. So if you will serum creatinine, they gave that one. If you will calculate the creatinine clearance of that patient, so you will get the value of 40 milligram per ml. So that's mean we have to check that if any drug which is affected by the creatinine clearance value, so we will not use that. Dabigatran, the standard dose, we know that 150 milligram per twice daily, and we will decrease the dose only when the value is less than 30. But here the value is 40, so we have to give the standard dose, not the decreased dose. So option A is not correct. Rivaroxaban is 20 milligram once daily. This is the standard dose of the rivaroxaban, but we know that this rivaroxaban and edoxaban, they both are affected when the patient's creatinine clearance value is less than 50 ml. But so means these are the edoxaban and rivaroxaban should not be the option, because this is the standard dose. This is not the decreased dose. So these two is not the option. So only the remaining option is bixaban, 5 mg twice daily. Bixaban, we know that the three different factors we check in the patient. If either of two is present, we will decrease the dose. The first one is age more than or equal to 80 years, but this patient is 73 years old. So first one is not there. Then the weight should be less than 60, but this patient weight is, I think, so 80 kg. So second factor is not there. Serum creatinine factor is there, but we have to at least fulfill two factors. But this patient is fulfilling only one value. So it means that we will use the standard dose of the bixaban, that is 5 milligram twice daily. So C option is correct. Next is the 6 months later, BD needs to undergo percutaneous coronary intervention. Now this patient is going for the percutaneous coronary intervention for the management of his coronary artery disease. He has had no medication changes and vital sign and laboratory information consistent, which is the best available evidence-based approach to this. Here we have had only two drugs, rivaroxaban and edoxaban, that are showing efficacy with clopidogrel in this population. So it means a bixaban and the option B and option C for warfarin is not. We have to see that the you will see the dose of edoxaban is 15 milligram plus aspirin is 81 milligram plus clopidogrel. But these containing three different drugs. But we know that the standard therapy is direct oral anticoagulants plus clopidogrel. So option A is the rivaroxaban with two drugs, rivaroxaban and clopidogrel. And because of the creatinine clearance, the dose is also adjusted. It's from 15 to 10 milligram. So it means the option A is the correct one. So the next portion is the anticoagulation in valvular disease. First, we discussed in the anticoagulation in non-valvular atrial fibrillated patient. Now we will see the anticoagulation in valvular disease, which valves are involved. Valvular diseases, I will just briefly explain that the thromboembolism risk is very high. It's 20% more than the non-valvular involvement. So here we have valves. One is the mitral valve and the other one is the aortic valve. Mitral valve, that is present between the atrium and the ventricles. left atrium and left ventricle, while the aortic valve is present between the left ventricle and the aorta. The risk of thromboembolism is high in the mitral valve as compared to the aortic valve. The second is the types of the valve which are we use. Either we are using the bioprosthetic valve or we are using the mechanical valve. So the risk of embolism is less in bioprosthetic valve as compared to the mechanical valve. So we have to make sure when we have these type of patients, what type of valve is involved and what type of material, bioprosthetic or mechanical valve we are using to repair that valve. So first of all, the bioprosthetic valve, we will see that the first 3 months, the risk is very high in bioprosthetic valve, especially when we are using the bioprosthetic valve in the mitral valve side. Risk of bioprosthetic heart valve is less than the mechanical valve, as I already explained to you. Risk of thromboembolism in mitral valve is more than the aortic valve. So now first we will see the aortic bioprosthetic valve. Now with the aortic bioprosthetic valve, we also are using two different techniques. If we are using the most conventional techniques, then we are using the aspirin 50 to 100 milligram once daily for 3 months after the valve implantation. Warfarin with the INR value of 2 to 3 for at least 3 months, or we can extend to 6 months if the patient has low risk of them. Next is the second technique. We are using the transcatheter aortic bioprosthetic valve. Then we can use the aspirin for a longer period of time with clopidogrel and clopidogrel for a 6 month. Alternately, we can use the warfarin for 3 months if the risk is low, or aspirin can be continued for the indefinite period of time. Next is the mitral bioprosthetic valve. First two options are the aortic valve. Now this is the mitral valve. Warfarin therapy with the INR of target 2 to 3 for the months after valve implantation. Aspirin should be used in addition to warfarin if the patient has the low risk. One thing is that if the mitral valve is there, definitely we will use the warfarin. Second is the mechanical heart valve. If we are using the mechanical heart valve at the side of aorta, aortic valve, or the mitral valve, then warfarin should be there. When we use the mechanical valve, we will give the therapy with the warfarin. Warfarin, the strategy we will use, that we will start the warfarin with the low molecular weight heparin until the warfarin achieve the INR value, it's stabilized. Then we will discontinue the other anticoagulant, injectable anticoagulants, and continue the warfarin. So the aortic mechanical heart valve, warfarin therapy with the INR target is 2 to 3. Patient with thrombotic risk factor, we can increase the target 2.5 to 2.3. Patient with the low risk of bleeding, we will start the aspirin as well. And some patients which are using the on-X aortic valve. On-X aortic is a type of new type of valve which is containing low risk of bleeding, so low risk of thromboembolism as well. So we can use aspirin and as well as the warfarin with the lower INR values, 1.5 to 2 in this population. Mitral mechanical valve, same warfarin should be there. If the patient is at low risk, aspirin should be continued. If the patient has aortic and mitral both valve involvement, so INR value should be higher, 2.5 to 3. So the question related to this topic is that patient is SD, is a 62-year-old woman, height 65 inches, weight is 80 kg, with a history of significant primary mitral regurgitation. Her electrocardiogram reveals significant leaflet flaring that is not amenable to mitral valve repair. She also has a history of hypertension, dyslipidemia, and gout. Her current medication include lisinopril 10 mg daily, hydrochlorothiazide 25 mg daily, simvastatin 40 mg daily, allopurinol 300 mg daily. Heart rate is 68 beats per minute, and blood pressure. Similarly, the creatinine clearance is there. She is scheduled to undergo valve replacement therapy and will receive a mechanical mitral valve. We were discussing the anticoagulation prospective plan and with ST's team. So here, one thing, the patient is going with the mechanical and mitral valve. So it means high risk. Mitral valve, high risk of thromboembolism. Mechanical valve, also high risk of thromboembolism. So we will use, one thing is ensure that we will use the warfarin therapy. And the INR range should be high, like it's between 2.5 to 3.5 in these population, because the risk of both high risk options we are using here. So first option is subcutaneous 18 milligram every 12 hours until adjusted dose warfarin achieve a goal of 2.5 to 3 plus aspirin. Second is the subcutaneous aspirin and enoxaparin for 40 milligram until adjusted dose warfarin to INR of 2 to 3 with aspirin. Then intravenous unfractionated heparin with the bolus dose, then continuous infusion, then adjusted warfarin with the INR 2 to 3. The last option is adjusted dose warfarin to INR of 2.5 to 3.5 plus aspirin. So only the option A and option D contain have the INR value of between 2.5 to 3.5. So it means either of these two options is true. The other two options containing the INR value of 2 to 3, that is subtherapeutic level for this option. Now we already discussed that when we start the warfarin, we will start with the parenteral anticoagulation. So that because the warfarin takes time to show their therapeutic effect. So until the warfarin is showing their effect, we combine the warfarin with the parenteral anticoagulant so that the parenteral anticoagulant give the anticoagulation until the warfarin achieve their stable INR value. Then we discontinue the parenteral anticoagulant and continue with the warfarin. So option D doesn't contain any parenteral anticoagulant, so it's not correct. So only the option A is the correct, which we will start with the enoxaparin and warfarin together with an INR goal of 2.5 to 3.5 plus aspirin we will give. And when the warfarin achieve their INR level, we will discontinue the parenteral anticoagulant and continue with the warfarin. Next is the which statement does describe the thrombotic risk in patient with valve replacement surgery. Bioprosthetic valve carry high risk. No, we know that the mechanical valve having high risk. So option is not correct. The highest risk of thrombosis with bioprosthetic valve replacement is during the first year of first after surgery. We already discussed that it's high only within the first 3 months, first year. So option B is not correct. All patients with rheumatic mitral valve disease should receive anticoagulation therapy. With the rheumatic mitral valve involvement disease, actually there are some exception that we are not giving the anticoagulation. So this option C is also not correct. Valve replacement in the mitral position carries a high risk of thrombosis than aortic position. Then yes, this is the right option, that mitral valve position containing high risk of thromboembolism as compared to the aortic positions. So option D is the correct. Sorry. Next is the prevention of venous thromboembolism. Venous thromboembolism, it's include either deep vein thromboembolism or pulmonary embolism. The risk factor, this chart is showing the various risk factors for the thromboembolism, that age, surgery, trauma, hypercoagulable states, central venous catheterization, estrogen use or selective estrogen receptor modulator, erythropoiesis stimulating agent, previous VTE, cancer and its treatments, various organs cancers, immobility or lower extremity paralysis, certain medical diseases, which include stroke, paralysis, and acute infection, COPD, IBD, nephrotic syndrome, and etc. Smoking and obesity. So this chart is showing that if the patient has these conditions, these patient has high risk of developing DVT or PE. Risk stratification, there are low risk patient, moderate risk patient, high risk patient. Low risk patient, which is the thromboembolic thromboembolism chance less than 10%. That is the patient which are younger than 40 years and patient is medically ill and but fully mobile. Moderate risk 10 to 40%. That patient which have open gynecological and urological surgery and medical ill patient with bed rest or sick. High risk patient will have the chances of 40 to 80% developing thromboembolism, which have the major surgery, age is more than 40, cancer, hypercoagulable states, hip or knee arthroplasty, major trauma, spinal cord injury, etc. This is the different condition and the prevalence of thromboembolism in that conditions is showing in this now medically ill patient. Medically ill patient has lesser chances of developing thromboembolism, but the patient population is high. So the numbers are high, but the chances is less in that population. General surgery, it's 15 to 40, major gynecological surgery, 15 to 40%, major urological surgery, neurosurgery, then stroke patient, the major orthopedic surgery. Orthopedic surgery has the highest risk of developing the thromboembolism, in which the hip replacement surgery, hip fracture, and total knee replacement have 84% chance of developing the thromboembolism. Major trauma is there, and it's also containing high risk spinal cord injury, critical care these all patients having the. Next is the different strategies for the prophylaxis. We are using two different strategies in these patients. Either we are using the mechanical prophylaxis and or the pharmacological prophylaxis. Mechanical prophylaxis, we are using two options. Either we are using elastic stocking or intermittent pneumatic compression. Both are strategies we are using in those patients when the patient has. They are both the strategies we are using when the patient has high risk of bleeding, because after surgery the risk of bleeding is high. So first of all, we start with the mechanical prophylaxis until the risk is settled down for the bleeding. Then we will start with the pharmacological prophylaxis. Pharmacological prophylaxis, we have different options: low molecular weight heparin, unfractionated heparin, fondaparin X, warfarin. Warfarin is only particularly we are using with the orthopedic surgery. Direct oral anticoagulant. Direct oral anticoagulants are also specifically we are using in the orthopedic prophylaxis. Aspirin, the data is questionable, but still some showing some efficacy in that population. First of all, we will go with the orthopedic surgery. As I told you, the highest risk in any surgery, the higher risk of thromboembolism is there, so it's orthopedic surgery. DVT rate is high in the knee surgery, while the PE, pulmonary embolism rate is higher in the hip surgery. Some issues, practical issues, unfractionated heparin, it's insufficient protection against the VT in the orthopedic surgery, so it is not really recommended, not usually using them. Aspirin has also only few single study which have some recommendation, not generally we are using the aspirin. Mechanical prophylaxis, as I told you, the risk when initially after surgery, risk of bleeding is high, so we will start with the mechanical prophylaxis and then we will go with the pharmacological prophylaxis. Knee arthroplasty. In knee arthroplasty, particularly, we stop VT prophylaxis when the patient start mobilization, so we will discontinue. Deltaprin has not been evaluated in published trial for VT prophylaxis in the knee replacement surgery. Next is the dabigatran is available in the United States for the prevention of the patient which is undergoing the hip replacement, but not recommended in the knee replacement surgery. And dabigatran is inferior to enoxaparin 30 milligram in the knee replacement surgery. Rivaroxaban is superior if we will compare with the enoxaparin 40 mg once daily in hip replacement and 40 milligram once daily or enoxaparin 30 milligram twice daily in the knee replacement surgery. Similarly, apixaban shows superiority if we will compare with the enoxaparin 40 milligram in hip and knee replacement, and it's not inferior if we are comparing with the enoxaparin 30 milligram twice daily. Timing of initiation is important when we have to start with the prophylaxis of the VTE. As I told you, the risk of thrombotic event is high immediately after the surgery. So it's better to start the anti-thrombotic thromboembotic prophylactic as early as possible. Sometimes we are starting after the we also have to consider the bleeding risk. So by balancing the bleeding risk and the thromboembotic risk, we have to start the therapy. So for orthopedic surgery, we have different options that we have. Parenteral anticoagulant is there, warfarin is there, direct oral anticoagulants are there. Their doses are there. I'm just going through quickly for this one because we are also getting late. The knee replacement, the dose is usually 30 milligram once daily and start 12 to 24 hours after the surgery. Similarly, the delta pain that is also started 6 to 8 hours after the surgery. Fondaparinux also 6 to 8 hours after the surgery. Warfarin, we are usually started before the 1 day before or the evening of the surgery days, and similarly the rivaroxaban and boxaban also we are using. Only the hip replacement surgery, we have two different options. Either we are using the 30 milligram twice daily or 40 milligram once daily. Similarly, delta pain, either we are using the 25 initially and continue with the 5,000, or we will start with the 5,000 initiated the evening before the surgery. Fondaparinux, same dose. Warfarin and other have same dose. Dabigatran, which is not recommended in the knee replacement, but can be used in the hip replacement, as we discussed previously. It started with the 110 milligram initially, 1 to 4 hours after the surgery, 220 milligram once daily we are using. Hip fracture, the direct oral anticoagulation has insufficient data. We are not using. We are using only the enoxaparin, fondaparinux, and warfarin. Spine surgery usually in the start we are not, prophylaxis not recommended on the patient don't have a risk factor. If the patient has the additional risk factor like malignancy is there, advanced age, neurological deficit, previous VT history, so we will start with the prophylaxis, and usually we are using the subcutaneous unfractionated heparin or low molecular weight heparin in this condition. Next is the non-orthopedic surgery. Non-orthopedic surgery, as we know that the non-orthopedic surgery, the risk is thromboembolism is lesser than the orthopedic surgery, but still the risk is there. So if we general surgery, and one thing is important that direct oral anticoagulants or warfarin has the role mainly in the orthopedic surgery. For the other surgery, we are usually using like either we are using low molecular weight heparin or unfractionated heparin. These two drugs are more predominant in the other populations. Low molecular weight and general surgery, unfractionated heparin, low molecular weight in DVT we are using, but in the PE, low molecular weight is preferred. Neurosurgery, also we have to use the same prophylactic low molecular weight and unfractionated heparin. And the pharmacological prophylaxis, usually we are starting 18 to 24 hours after the surgery. Vascular surgery, same. If the patient has the risk factor, we will give them prophylaxis. And also, dosing recommendation is same. We will start with the mechanical prophylaxis, and then we will go with the pharmacological prophylaxis. And the pharmacological prophylaxis is similar as the general surgery recommendation. Gynecological surgery, if the patient is a laparoscopic procedure or patient procedure lasting less than 30 minutes, we will no need to give the prophylaxis. If the procedure time is prolonged, then we will use the same unfractionated heparin and low molecular weight. Gynecological cancer, one thing is important that we use a higher doses of the unfractionated heparin. Usually, the previous cases we are using the BID doses unfractionated heparin, but here we will use the 3 ID doses, and low molecular weight is also we are using in higher doses. Fondaparinux was more effective than dalteplin in these population. Urological surgery, also the transurethral or laparoscopic urological procedure, we will not use the prophylaxis. For the other cases, we will use as the same as recommended in the general surgery. Bariatric surgery, also we use the higher doses, low molecular weight, infection happening, and even the dalteplin. Here we are using 7,500 units, but the other cases we are using usually 5,000 units. But here in this population, we will use 7,500 units. Thoracic surgery, same, the recommendation is limited. If we have to use, we use generally follow the same procedure like we are using in the general surgery. Coronary bypass, also we will see the risk of thromboembolism is there. We will give the prophylaxis, and in these cases we are preferred the low molecular weight heparin over the unfractionated heparin, because the unfractionated risk of heparin induced thrombocytopenia is high. So we prefer the low molecular weight heparin over the unfractionated heparin in this population. These are the simple some dosage recommendation in different surgeries. Only the important thing is that as we know that the neurosurgery, the unfractionated heparin 5,000 units Q8 hourly, but the other surgeries and also the bariatric surgery it's Q8 hourly. But for the other, we have both the option, either Q8 hourly or Q12 hourly. Similarly, enoxaparin in the bariatric surgery, it's BID, but the other cases, all the others once daily. Dalteplin dose is also 7,500 in bariatric surgery, but for the other, it's 5,000. And also fondaparinux dose is 5 milligram once daily in the bariatric surgery, but for the other, it's 2.5 mg. Next is the medically ill patient. Medically ill patient, the risk of thromboembolism is lesser, but the number of population is high. More up to 60% of the VTE cases are occurring in this population. So in this population, we are using the unfractionated heparin 5,000 BID or enoxaparin 20 mg has less efficacy. So we are 5,000 mg to 8 hourly in this population. And also the enoxaparin 40 mg daily is showing better efficacy. Enoxaparin showed better protection against VE and less hematoma as compared to the unfractionated heparin in this population. Apixaban 2.5 mg twice daily, rivaroxaban 10 mg twice daily. The 10 mg daily is compared with the enoxaparin in a different trial, but all the trials show the efficacy in reducing the risk of thromboembolism, but the problem with them is the major bleeding. So the major bleeding is high if we are using the drug oral anticoagulant. So we are not preferred the drug oral anticoagulation in the medically ill patient because of the reason of major bleeding. So the preferred drug is either unfractionated heparin, enoxaparin, dalteplin, and fondaparinux. Next is the extended prophylaxis. Extended prophylaxis, especially in the medically ill patient, we need extended time for the prophylaxis because most of the cases of the thromboembolism occur when the patient is discharged from the hospital after 30 days of the discharge. So for that reason, we need the extended prophylaxis for the thromboembolism that is extended about to 35 to 42 days. And enoxaparin, rivaroxaban, and other direct oral anticoagulation are studied for the extended period, but the problem with them is same as major bleeding. So because of the major bleeding, we are not recommended direct oral anticoagulant, even the enoxaparin in this population. So there is a new drug that is a Bitrixaban that have a safer profile, less bleeding risk. It's recommended for the extended period of prophylaxis. Doses of the trial, they use the doses of 160 milligram initial dose and then the 80 milligram once daily. The patient inclusion criteria is age 75 or older that are eligible, if 60 to 74, but they have the additional risk factor, or the D dimer is 2 times the upper limit of the normal. So they are included 40 to 59, history of VTE or history of cancer, either one risk factor or D-dimer value is more 2 times the upper limit of the normal, so they are included in this population. Risk factors are as under, and we have to decrease the dose to half if the patient creatinine value is between 15 to 29 ml, or patient is using the stronger inhibitor of P-glycoprotein. Critically ill patient, in critically ill patient, also the risk is high in that population. Unfractionated heparin to be no more effective than control in the trauma patient. Enoxaparin 30 mg twice daily has better efficacy than the unfractionated heparin, and prophylaxis usually we will start 24 to 36. If the risk of is less, then we can delay the prophylaxis to 48 to 72 hours. Patient with severe trauma and the patient who are using the patient with the severe trauma and the patient which is using the vasopressin in critically ill patient, the problem is that the subcutaneous drug like enoxaparin is not efficacious. It's not providing this therapeutic response. So we will start with the unfractionated heparin infusion, and when the patient is stabilized, then we will convert the patient to the low molecular weight heparins in that population. Acute spinal injury, the similarly, unfractionated heparin TID has better result in the DVT, and similar and with the similar grading to enoxaparin, but PE is we will prefer the enoxaparin. Enoxaparin 30 mg twice daily is using during the acute injury. About 2 to 3 weeks, either regime can be used during the rehabilitation period. For rehabilitation, we can use either response. Similarly, the here in this patient, dalteparin 5000 mg daily show no inferiority than the enoxaparin 30 mg 20 twice daily. So we can use the dalteparin also in that patient. Burns, unfractionated heparin is twice daily is a preferred recommended regime. Critical care patient, either with this critical patient, either with the surgery patient, either medically ill patient, unfractionated heparin and low molecular weight heparin are the better efficacy than the other drugs. Mechanical prophylaxis, as we know that we have to maintain the risk between the bleeding and the thromboembolism. So start with the mechanical prophylaxis, and when the risk is reduced, then we can shift with the pharmacological prophylaxis. Dalteparin 5000 units subcutaneous once daily provides similar protection against DVT and better protection against PE when it's compared with the heparin, unfractionated heparin. So we can recommend the dalteparin in that population as well. The doses regime for these patients, trauma, acute spinal cord injury, burns, and critical care patients, as you can see, fondaparinux is not recommended in trauma, acute spinal cord injury, and burns. But critical care, we can use that one if we have the risk of heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. So it's an alternative. We can use that one. The duration for the prophylaxis, generally medically ill patient, 6 to 14 days, as long patients start mobility. Matrixaban, we know that we can extend use for the extended period. Major surgery until the hospital discharge. Major surgery in patient with the previous VT, so it's after discharge we will continue up to 28 hours. Surgery for gastrointestinal or gynecological cancer up to 28 hours. Total knee replacement for 10 days, total hip replacement 4 to 6 weeks, hip fracture surgery 4 to 6 weeks, critical care patient until the patient is shifted from the critical area to the other area, medical area, then re-evaluated either we have to continue or not. Similarly, the major trauma until hospital discharge and prophylaxis is continued, the patient mobility is impaired for 8 weeks. Similarly, patient with spinal cord injury until hospital discharge, and after 8 weeks, if the patient is uncomplicated complete motor injury, 12 weeks until discharge, and from rehabilitation in patient with complete motor and other risk factor. So these are the different duration for the prophylaxis in different populations. Next is the patient with the severe renal injury. We have to adjust the doses if the patient has a severe renal injury. For example, the enoxaparin, if we are using if the patient has the creatinine clearance is less than 30 ml, we will not increase the dose of more than 30 milligram once daily. Deltaprin is the only drug which is not affected by the renal impairment. We can continue the deltaprin standard dose. Fondaparinux, rivaroxaban, dabigatran, and edoxaban, we know that we have to adjust the dose according to the creatinine clearance, so we have to adjust the dose. And if the patient is on hemodialysis, so preferred option is the unfractionated heparin. In obesity, we have to give the increased dose, but there is no standard recommendation. For example, the enoxaparin 40 mg twice daily is preferred than the 30 mg twice daily, and the injection on the thigh, the injection of enoxaparin into the thigh in patients with obesity have lower bioavailability as compared to the abdomen. And if the patient has the BMI more than or equal to 40 kg per meter square, we have to recommend the higher doses of the low molecular weight heparin. Pregnancy warfarin is not usually recommended because of the congenital abnormalities, especially in the first trimester. We are not giving. We can use the warfarin for the second trimester, but usually it's avoided. Low molecular weight or unfractionated heparin can be used for throughout the pregnancy. Fondaparinux is not recommended in the third trimester, and during the peripartum period, we may prefer the unfractionated heparin because of its shorter half-life, and direct oral anticoagulants have no role in the pregnancy. Next is the patient case. BG is a 62-year-old man, height 69 inches, weight is 110 kg, hospitalized for heart failure exacerbation. He has a symptom when doing only limited exertion and have been out of the bed only to use the bathroom for the past 3 days. His medical history also includes stable ischemic heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, PE 2 years ago. So this patient, from this one, we will see that patient's hypertension, diabetes, pulmonary embolism history. So patient has high risk of developing the thromboembolism. The currently smoke 2 packs per day and drinks 1 glass of wine and dinner most evenings. His current medication include bisoprolol 5 mg daily, lisinopril 10 mg daily, aspirin, ranolazine, furosemide, spironolactone, metformin. His blood pressure is given, heart rate is given, laboratory values, and brain natriuretic peptide is given. This is the most appropriate VTE prevention strategy for BE. This is, as we know that this is a medically ill patient, and we need the prophylaxis for that patient. For the medically ill patient, we know that we are not recommending the direct oral anticoagulant therapy because of their high risk of bleeding. So it means that the abixaban is not there. Abixaban should not be there because its option B is not correct. Option D, BG's risk does not warrant prophylactic therapy. No patient has the different risk factors for the developing the thromboembolism. So option D is also incorrect. Now the remaining options are A and C. A, fondaparinux and enoxaparin both are recommended in medically ill patient, but the dose for the fondaparinux for the medically ill patient is 2.5 milligram once daily. Here it's 5 milligram daily, which is a higher dose. So option A is incorrect. So the remaining option C, which is enoxaparin 40 mg subcutaneous daily, is the right option. Next is the treatment of venous thromboembolism. Venous thromboembolism, here we will discuss about the Virchow's triad. The Virchow's triad contains 3 things. Venous stasis is there, vascular damage is there, or inherited or acquired hypercoagulable states. If these factors are there, so the chances though it may develop to the venous thromboembolism and thrombotic event. Some patients carry high risk, some patients carry low risk. We have to stratify the risk. Most of the time, if we will see the DVT or PE, patients are asymptomatic. The patient doesn't show any symptoms. So what we will use, we use the Wells criteria. The Wells criteria, from the Wells criteria, we check the probability of developing the DVT. If the patient has low probability of developing DVT and the patient's age is less than 65 and the D-dimer value is negative, so we rule out the DVT. So patient don't have the DVT. or if the patient has these factors, so we will further evaluate the patient with the duplex ultrasonography or the imaging study to confirm the diagnosis of the DVT. This is the Wells criteria, different factors, each factor is containing 1 point. So we have to know if the value is less than 0, it's low probability, moderate 1 to 2, and if value is more than 3, it's high probability of developing the DVT. Different signs and symptoms of the DVT and pulmonary embolism are there: edema, leg pain, calf tenderness, swellings, discoloration of and increased leg warmth. If the patient has these symptoms, the patient may have the DVT. Similarly, the pulmonary embolism, tachycardia, tachypnea, hemoptysis, dyspnea, cough and chest pain. If patient has these symptoms, so patient may have the pulmonary embolism. Similarly, the PE, we also, patient may be asymptomatic diagnosis. Similarly, from Wells criteria, we'll see the probability. If the probability is low, patient is younger than 65, D-dimer value is negative, so we rule out the PE. If the patient has the positive D-dimer and other factors are there, so we will further proceed with the CT and different imaging studies to confirm the diagnosis of the PE. Wells criteria, different values have different points. 0 to 1 is low probability, 2 to 6 is high and moderate, and more than equal to 7 is the high probability. Next is the treatment strategies for if the patient has thromboembolism. We are using 3 different strategies. One is the bridging strategies, other is the changing strategies and changing therapy strategy, and third one is the monotherapy strategy. Bridging strategy is that we start with the parenteral anticoagulant, either unfractionated heparin, low molecular weight heparin, fondaparinux, with warfarin, because we know that the warfarin takes time to show their effect. So until that time, we start with the parenteral anticoagulant and combine with the warfarin and continue the therapy. After a few days, when the warfarin achieve their INR value, we discontinue the anticoagulant and continue with the warfarin. So this is the bridging therapy. Changing, we start with the injectable anticoagulant at least for 5 days. Then we continue or stop the parenteral anticoagulant, and then we will start with the anticoagulant. Here we use the dabigatran or edoxaban for the period duration. Third one is the monotherapy, that we start with the either rivaroxaban or abixamab at a higher doses. After some time, we change the higher doses to a lower doses and continue the therapy with the appropriate time. So these are the 3 different strategies we are using. First of all, the bridging therapy. Bridging therapy, as I told you, with the warfarin, with the parenteral anticoagulant, then after some time discontinue the parenteral anticoagulants and then continue with the warfarin therapy. Goal is usually 2 to 3 for the INR. INR goal 1.5 to 2 has not been proven the efficacy. Where the bridging therapy with warfarin is preferred when the patient has renal dysfunction, because in that patient population, we have to adjust the dose or sometimes contraindicated the drug direct oral anticoagulant. So we prefer the warfarin therapy when the patient cannot afford the direct oral anticoagulant, and when the transition to therapy making acquiring a drug oral anticoagulation difficult. So that's why in these 3 cases we can use the warfarin therapy. Doses for the bridging therapy is, if we are using IV heparin, we start with the 80 units per kg as a bolus dose, then continuous infusion with 18 units per kg per hour until the institutional goal of the APTT is established. Then the subcutaneous dose is 17,500 initially, Q12 hourly, and we have adjust the APTT for the institutional goal. If we use the 333 units per kg followed by the 250 units per kg Q12 hourly, then there is no need to monitor the APTT. Enoxaparin is 1 mg Q12 hourly or 1.5 mg once daily. But if the creatinine kinase is less than 30, we will use 1 mg per kg once daily. Deltapine is 100 units Q12 hourly or 200 units per kg Q12 hourly. Similarly, Fondaparinux dose-based, weight-based doses are there. So these are the different doses for the bridging therapy. Next is the changing therapy. Changing therapy, as I already explained you, initially we will start with the parenteral anticoagulation. After some time, 5 days, we stop the parenteral anticoagulation and start with the dabigatran or edoxaban as a for an appropriate period of time. So first trial is the dabigatran, that is a RECOVER-1 trial, RECOVER-2 trial. They include both the population DVT and PE or both the population. Here they started with the median day of, for example, 9 days median for the anticoagulation, and after that they change it to the dabigatran. And the patient was randomized and to compare with the standard warfarin therapy. The primary endpoint for VTE were similar between the dabigatran and warfarin. Non-inferiority was established between the two groups. But the major bleeding was significantly reduced with dabigatran. And major and critically relevant non-major bleeding was significantly reduced with dabigatran as compared to the warfarin. So safety is better, but the efficacy is similar in the both groups. Next is the similarly edoxaban is compared with the standard therapy. Here the median dose for the parenteral anticoagulants are 7 days. And then after that, the patient was randomized to edoxaban, and some patient which started warfarin and anticoagulant concomitantly, and then after some time when the warfarin INR is stabilized between 2 to 3, they stop the parenteral anticoagulant and continue with the warfarin for 12 months. Primary endpoint for symptomatic VT even was similar between two groups. Patient subgroup enrolled with the severe PE defined producing right ventricular dysfunction has significant 48% reduction in primary endpoint as compared to the warfarin. So patient with the severe PE, they showed the better result with the edoxaban than the warfarin. Major bleeding was not significantly reduced with the edoxaban, but major and clinically relevant non-major bleeding was reduced with the edoxaban as compared to the warfarin. The third strategy is the monotherapy. Monotherapy, here we will start with the drugs with the higher doses, and then we change it to the lower doses and continue for an appropriate period of time. Here, first of all, the rivaroxaban is evaluated in Einstein trial for DVT and Einstein trial for PE. Rivaroxaban started initially and was compared with the enoxaparin bridging to the warfarin, enoxaparin and warfarin standard therapy. And median duration of injectable anticoagulant was 8 days. After that 8 days, most of the patient are using the warfarin as continuous therapy. Investigators determined whether the patient would be treated 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months. So they treated the patient in this trial either some patient 3 months, some patient 6 months, some patient 12 months. So DVT patient and PE patient, they are which are randomized to the rivaroxaban, they are already using the injectable therapy before coming to the rivaroxaban, like 73% DVT trial and 93% in the PE trial. These patients are already using the injectable, and then they come into the trial, and then they start the rivaroxaban monotherapy, and then they continue. So primary endpoint of the symptomatic VT event was similar between the both the groups, but the major bleeding was reduced. So safety is similarly, the safety is higher, but the efficacy is similar. Major and CRNM bleeding did not differ in both the groups in this trial. Fourth one is with the monotherapy with the apixaban trial, amplified trial for DVT and PE. Similarly, here we start with the apixaban with the higher doses, and then we change it to the lower doses, and the other group we start with the enoxaparin concomitantly with warfarin, and then after some time, median days is 6.5 days, we stop the parenteral anticoagulation and continue with the warfarin for 6 months. And here also 86% patient in the apixaban arm, which are already using before coming into the trial, they are already using the injectable anticoagulant. The primary endpoint for the symptomatic VT event is similar. Both non-inferiority is established, but the major bleeding is reduced, and serum bleeding was also reduced with the apixaban. So the safety is higher with apixaban and with the rivaroxaban than the warfarin, but the efficacy is same in the treatment of the venous thromboembolism. Different dosage strategies which are used in these trials: dabigatran, rivaroxaban, dabigatran 150 mg twice daily after 5 to 10 days of the injectable. This is we use in the changing therapy. Then dose adjustment is there. You can read this one. Rivaroxaban is also started initially with the higher dose, 15 mg twice daily for 21 days. Then they change to lower doses, which is 20 milligram once daily. After 6 months, the dose can be reduced to 10 milligram once daily. Apixaban started with 10 milligram twice daily for 7 days, then 5 milligram twice daily. Then 6 months they changed to 2.5 milligram twice daily. Edoxaban is also in the changing therapy, that is 60 milligram once daily, 5 to 10 days of the injectable therapy. They started the edoxaban. Secondary VT prevention. The secondary VT prevention, that all patients with VT should be treated at least 3 months after the VT event. The patient should have to be treated for at least 3 months for the secondary prophylaxis. Patient without a transient or reversible cause should be considered for a long-term, potentially indefinite oral anticoagulation. And data analysis consistently shows significant reduction in VT with continued therapy for 12 to 14 days, 24 additional months. So if the patient has a first episode of VT secondary to or a transient or reversible risk factor, the duration should be 3 months. The recommendation applies for both DVT and PE. First episode of unprovoked VT, at least 3 months, or we can continue if the patient has low risk factor of bleeding. First episode of VT with inherited or acquired hemophilia, at least 3 months, and similarly in this patient, if the patient has low risk factor of bleeding, we can continue for further. First episode of cancer-associated VT, at least 3 to 6 months, and consider extended duration until cancer is on. Low molecular weight, heparin, rivaroxaban, and edoxaban are recommended over other anticoagulation in the cancer patient. Second, VT, provoked or unprovoked, indefinite, applied to the patient which have not had high risk of bleeding. So we can use the anticoagulation therapy. Cancer patient, as we discussed previously, that low molecular weight heparin is preferred and it should be given for 3 to 6 months. Deltaprine also shows the efficacy in this population. Edoxaban and rivaroxaban has been compared with deltaprine in the trial. Collectively, drug or anticoagulant better reduce the recurrent VT, but the problem similarly, the bleeding. Major bleeding is high, and this major bleeding especially occur in the gastrointestinal bleeding. So the ISTH and National Comprehensive Cancer Network, they recommend rivaroxaban and edoxaban to the treatment of cancer other than the GI cancers. Patient case: RS is a 48 years old man, height is 70 inches, weight is 90 kg, who present to the emergency department with pain and swelling in his left leg. On examination, his leg is warm to touch and tender and has 3+ pitting edema below the knee. His D dimer is positive. His duplex ultrasonography identified a femoral popliteal DVT. So this patient has confirmed DVT. He understands that he will need to receive the anticoagulation therapy, but wants to avoid any injection if possible. He has good insurance coverage. His other medical conditions are hypertension, HIV, and dyslipidemia. His medication includes benzapiril 20 milligram daily, ritonavir 100 milligram daily, darunavir 800 milligram daily, emtricitabine, tenofovir digoxin, disoproxil daily, and atorvastatin, and his vital signs are stable. His creatinine clearance is 78 ml per minute, which is the most appropriate anticoagulation in this. So for this one, we studied 3 different techniques. One is the bridging techniques, other is the changing technique, and third one is the monotherapy. For bridging techniques and changing techniques, both we start with the parental anticoagulation. So in both techniques, for bridging techniques, we use warfarin, but start with the parental anticoagulant. And for the changing treatment, also we use the edoxaban, but with the parental anticoagulation initially, and then discontinue, and then start the edoxaban. So answer B and C options are incorrect because there is no parental anticoagulation with these two options. So B and C is not there. So now remaining is A and D, which is starting with the higher doses and then comes to the lower doses. This is the can be the option. Rivaroxaban option A, if you will see that this is a standard dose. That is 15 milligram twice daily for 21 days, then followed by the 20 milligram, and then after 6 months they change to 10 milligram. But the problem with that, this patient has HIV, and for the HIV, the patient is using some protease inhibitor, ritonavir and darunavir. These protease inhibitors are the potent inhibitor of P-glycoprotein and cyclone P3A4. So that's why if the patient has the protease inhibitor, so it's not recommended to use the rivaroxaban. So we're not using the rivaroxaban. So answer A is not there, should not be correct. The remaining answer is D, but we know that the standard therapy for apixaban is 10 milligram twice daily initially for 7 days, and then followed by the 5 milligram twice daily. But the problem is that also with rivaroxaban, if the protease inhibitor like potent inhibitor, P-glycoprotein inhibitor is there, so we have to reduce the dose to half. So here they reduce the dose to half. From initially they started with the 5 milligram twice daily instead of 10 milligram, and then they changed to 2.5 milligram twice daily instead of 5 milligram twice daily. So this is the correct option. The last one is the reversal of anticoagulation. This is the sorry, this is the last topic of this chapter. Reversal of anticoagulation, if you will see, the different blood products are used, but these blood products mainly manage the bleeding, major bleeding, but it's not used for the treatment of the or for the reversal of the anticoagulation. First of all is the packed red blood cells. Packed red blood cells, they are used also for the management of the bleeding. 1 unit, it's containing 250 ml that have a hemocrite value of 70 to 80% and can raise the hemoglobin level 1 to 2 gram per deciliter. But the risk factor for this packed blood cells is chill, fever, urticaria, tachycardia, infection, infusion, transfusion-related lung injury. Platelet may be used for the reversal of antiplatelet, but the data is limited. Each unit contains 200 to 300 ml, which is containing 300,000 to 600,000 platelet per cubic millimeter. Next is the fresh frozen plasma. But how we will get the fresh frozen plasma? We spun the whole blood and separate the red blood cell and platelet-rich plasma. Then we spun again platelet-rich plasma, and we separate the platelets and the plasma, and then this plasma is frozen, and this plasma should be frozen within 8 hours of the blood collection and can be used for up to 12 months. Commonly, underdose for reversing the warfarin therapy takes multiple units. We have to take typical dose is 15 to 20 ml per kg. Critically ill patient will increase the dose to 30 ml per milligram. For this one, we need typing and cross matching. It takes 30 to 40 minutes to thaw, and then we can use this one. It's similar to the packed red blood cells and platelets. Next is the prothrombin complex concentrate. This is a combination of the different clotting factors. This is more concentrated than the fresh frozen plasma. 3-factor, 4-factor, and activated PCC, and the different clotting factor inside are there. Next is the cryoprecipitate. Cryoprecipitate is also we obtain from the fresh frozen plasma. First, we will thaw the fresh frozen plasma. Then we collect the precipitate globulin, and these globulin then again we suspend in the 20 to 40 ml of plasma, but they contain the factor 8, factor 13, Will-Brandt factor, fibrinosin and fibrinogen. These are mainly used to stop the bleeding from the fibrinolytics. Recombinant activated factor 7. This is actually not a blood product. This is obtained from the recombinant technology. and it has been used to treat the bleeding for unvaccinated heparin, low molecular weight heparin, direct oral anticoagulant heparin. Standard dose is 19 microgram per kg, but we can use the lower doses. Next is the massive transfusion protocol, where it's indicated what are the different components and what are the different issue with them. Massive transfusion protocol is indicated when 30 to 40% of blood volume is lost with hypotension. When 10 units of packed red blood cells in 24 hours they used, and still they need more. Transfuse entire blood volume in 24 hours, but still patient needs more. 50% of blood volume replacement in 3 hours. 4 units of packed red blood cell in 4 hours, but still the patient they needs more. So in that case, we use the massive transfusion protocol, and the component it's containing packed red blood plasma, platelets, fresh frozen plasma, or may also use the cryoprecipitate as well. What it's provide hemocratic value of 29%, platelet 88,000 per cubic millimeter, and clotting factor activity of 62% of the normal. But the different issue with them is the with this is the illusion-induced thrombocytopenia, citrate-induced hypocalcemia, hyperkalemia, and acidosis. Next is the how we can reverse with different anticoagulants. First of all is the unfractionated heparin. We know that the protamine is the standard antidote for the unfractionated heparin. This is used for managing the bleeding when we have reversed the unfractionated heparin before surgery, or when the unfractionated heparin is given during the surgery, we reverse that we using the protamine. Protamine, 1 milligram protamine utilizes 100 units of heparin. Now, if the patient is using continuous infusion of the heparin, so what we will do, the total of the past hour, 1/2 of the previous hour. So what we will do, we will calculate the total dose of past 3 hours. We will calculate the past 3 hour doses. We will calculate the past first hour dose, and then we take the 1/2 of the next hour dose and 1/24 of the next hour dose. Those these are 3 hours doses. And we combine them, and then we use that dose, and we can compare that how much, and we can calculate how much protamine is used to neutralize this amount. We will not take the whole 8 hour or 10 hour infusion dose. We will just take the 3 hour doses. First hour full dose, second hour half dose, and third hour 25th of the dose, and add this one, and then we calculate how much heparin we use accordingly, and accordingly we have to calculate the protamine 1 mg to utilize the 100 units of the heparin. But we have to consider that there is no bolus dose is given before that one, and the maximum dose should be 50 milligram as a single dose. Adverse effect is hypotension, bradycardia is there, and if the patient has some fish allergy, if the patient is undergoing a vasectomy, so maybe there is a chances of allergic reaction. If the patient has a chances of allergic reaction, we will give corticosteroid and antihistamine before giving the protamine. Blood product may be needed in patient with significant bleeding as well. Next is the low molecular weight heparin. Similarly, protamine is used, and here 1 milligram of protamine is utilizing 100 units of low molecular weight heparin, and 1 milligram of protamine is utilizing 1 mg of the enoxaparin. Here we have to consider that the low molecular weight is used. It's given within the 8 hour, previous 8 hour, or after the more than the 8 hours has been passed. If it is given within the 8 hours, so we will use like 1 mg is to utilize the 1 milligram of the enoxaparin. But if the more than 8 hours has been passed, so then we use 0.5 milligram of protamine to utilize the 100 units of the deltaprane or 1 milligram of the enoxaparin.
Hi, Dr. Zafar Iqbal. I'm sorry to disturb you.
Yes.
Sir, we have maximum 12 more minutes. Maximum I can go by 10, not more than that. So please wind up if you don't mind.
I will try my level best. Thank you. Next is the warfarin. Warfarin vitamin K is the warfarin antagonist in the If we are using the oral, it will take 24 to 48 hours to neutralize. If we are doing the IV, 8 to 12 hours. If we are using the subcutaneous, usually we are not using the subcutaneous because it's very erratic. It can increase and decrease. The dose is not continuous, so we are not using subcutaneous vitamin K. Next, we can use the fresh frozen plasma, and the prothrombin concentrate complex can be used. In that cases, the different values are there. If the INR is 2 or less than 4, 25 units, 4 to 6, 35 units per kg. If more than 6, 50 units per kg can be used. Or we can, if the INR is greater than 1.4 and cerebral bleeding, we can use even the lower doses, 12.5 to 25 units per kg. This is a flow chart for if the patient has the signs and symptoms of bleeding, the patient needs an immediate reversal. So we have to give the IV administration, that vitamin K 10 milligram, either a slow IV infusion, or we can give them together with the 4 PCC and check the INR after. And we can repeat the dose if the INR is still high. But on the other hand, if we don't need if the patient is not showing any symptoms and we don't need the immediate reversal, so we can check the INR value. If it's less than 4.5, we can omit the warfarin dose, and then we can check 3 to 7 days after that one. If 4.5 to 10, then again we check the risk of the bleeding. If the risk of bleeding is not there, then we can omit and continue and check again the INR after 3 to 7 days. If the bleeding risk is there, then we can omit 1 to 3 doses of warfarin and give the oral 5 milligram dose, or 1 to 3 milligram of the slow IV infusion, and then check the INR after 12 to 24 hours. If still high, more than 9, then repeat the administration of vitamin K and check, and then reduce the warfarin dose and continue that one. For dabigatran, activated PCC can be used. We have the factor 7, activated factor 7 can be used. For activated PCC, the dose should be 25 to 50 units per kg, and it can normalize the value within 30 minutes. But the specific antidote for the dabigatran is adarsuzumab, that is 350-fold high affinity of the dabigatran compared to the thrombin. And the different trials, there are 2 different trials that they use this antidote to reverse the dabigatran, and in both the trial they achieved 100% reversal, and full reversal occurred within 15 minutes and can remain up to 12 to 24 hours with this antidotes. DECT-10A inhibitors, especially it's for the we use the vitamin K and vitamin K and protamine antagonists are not effective in this. We can use the activated PCC, and the different trials, trial 1, 2, 3, they show the efficacy with the rivaroxaban and edoxaban. But the problem is, with these trials is that their power is very low because the population size is very less. So the main antidote for this one is andexanet alpha. This is we are giving the bolus dose and then the continuous infusion for 2 hours. The effect is achieved within minutes, and then it's continuous. The effect is continued during the continuous infusion and up till after 2 hours the discontinuation of the infusion. So in this ANNEXA 4 trial, the factor 10A in concentration is reduced in 89% in patients with receiving rivaroxaban and 93% with the apixaban. The standard dose is that 400 milligram in intravenous dose and followed by the 4 milligram per minute for 2 hour infusion. If the patient is using, last dose of the patient is apixaban 5 milligram daily and rivaroxaban 10 milligram daily or less, or rivaroxaban is higher doses, 15 to 20 milligram, but the dose is taken more than prior to 8 hours. Or if the patient is the standard dose, we can increase the dose 800 milligram initial bolus and then the continuous infusion for 8 milligram per minute for 2 hours. If the patient is using the high doses within 8 hours, So, but it's not indicated for edoxaban, betrixaban, enoxaparin, and fondaparinux. It's indicated for the rivaroxaban and apixaban only. This is the, if we are using, if the patient is going for the surgery, we have to stop the direct oral anticoagulant. This is the time when we have to stop that one. If the dabigatran, if the creatinine clearance is more than 50 ml, we will stop 1 to 2 days. If creatinine clearance 15 to 50 ml, 3 to 5 days before. Apixaban, rivaroxaban, and edoxaban, minor procedure 1 day, minor procedure with creatinine clearance less than 32 days, or major vascular procedure 2 days, I have to stop. Next is the patient case. KD is a 49 years old man. Height, weight is there, who was given a diagnosis of idiopathic DVT 3 weeks ago. He currently taking warfarin 8 milligram daily. He missed his INR reading last week when he went on a short vacation. Today his INR is 10.4. He is not currently bleeding and has no risk factor for bleeding, in addition to the holding his warfarin dose, which is the best initial strategy. This patient do not have the risk of bleeding. There is no bleeding is there, so it means that we will not use the intravenous therapy, and we will not use the immediate reversal like for PCC. So for PCC will not be used. Option B is incorrect, and the intravenous therapy with vitamin K, option D, is incorrect. Now the remaining is A and C, but we know that the oral therapy we will start with the 5 milligram vitamin K. So option C is the correct, option A is incorrect. Next is the JW is a 58-year-old man receiving enoxaparin 40 milligrams subcutaneously daily for VTE prophylaxis while trying to shave himself at 6 p.m. He cuts his neck, and the medical team cannot stop the bleeding. His last enoxaparin dose was given at 8 a.m., which would be the most appropriate protamine dose for JW. As we know that he cut at 6 p.m. and the last dose is 8 a.m. So the gap between them is 10 hours. So it means that the last dose he used is before 8 hours, like 10 hours. So it means that we use the protamine 0.5 milligram to neutralize 1 milligram of the enoxaparin. So here the enoxaparin is 40 milligram. We multiply 40 milligram with 0.5 milligram, so we will get the 20 milligram that we will use for the protamine 20 milligram to neutralize this enoxaparin 40 milligram dose. So option B is the correct answer. Thanks for your attention. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zafar, for your precious time in such an informative session. Our next session is on Saturday, 7 August 2021 on pulmonary disorders, gout and adult immunization by Dr. Zishan Khan. At the end of the session, I would like to thank Dr. Zafar once again. Thank you so much, sir.
Welcome.
Sir Rana Kamran, Sir Siddiqui, and our volunteers. Thank you, Allah Hafiz.
Thank you very much, Dr. Afia. And thank you very much, Dr. Zafar Iqbal. If there would be any question, we will let you know by WhatsApp. So if you will, once you will answer us, so we will provide the answers to our participants. Thank you very much once again. Inshallah, we will have you in the next session as well. Next year, in the start of the year, January or February, we will let you know. Inshallah, thank you very much, all participants. Inshallah, see you soon on the Saturday. Thank you very much, sir. Assalamu alaikum.